About a year or two ago, I wanted to make this video, but I hit a roadblock around that time because there was only 2 or 3 albums that I thought were genuinely disturbing. And to help expand my knowledge of a disturbing album, I would search up online what other people consider to be a disturbing album. And typically I would get a lot of recommendations that were either just some noise artist making just abstract, harsh, abrasive music, or some really dark, macabre-like rock album. I understand that they can be disturbing in terms of context, and some of the sounds can be quite off-putting from the norms of music. I get that. And music obviously is subjective, not how you think it's either good or bad, but how you understand it and perceive it in terms of its emotions. I get all of that. But to me, a disturbing album that really, gets and shakes me to my core is where every little bit of it, the context from what you can understand to the music being played itself, really makes you feel uneasy. It's almost like you're aware of the fact that it's disturbing you, but it's that emotion and that reaction your body gives off emotionally and mentally that you find almost, in a sense, fascination with it. It doesn't have to be good or bad. And with these albums I'm about to be talking about, that's the sensation I get from them. So keep that in mind as we go into this video. Some of these albums that I genuinely find disturbing, you might find overall enjoyment and entertainment with them, and if that's the case, more power to you. But if there are any albums out there that you find disturbing in terms of context or sound, I'd love to hear it. As for one out of the handful of albums that I personally find disturbing would be Aatrex Morgue, In Search of Death. This is a death industrial project from Italy, all done by Marco Corbabelli. And the composition on this, if you want to call it that, is just very abrasive, harsh, and just hateful as one can get in power electronic and death industrial music. Now, while musically it's not really something that is welcoming or easy to listen to, it's the context about everything, honestly, by Aatrex Morgue that's disturbing. Because Marco Corbabelli was one disturbed individual. If you go online and search up some of the interviews that he's done, it showcases just how hateful, miserable, and disturbed of a human being this guy was, having so much hate and distaste for just, it seems like, life itself. Like, he never really said anything positive, and the music that he created with Aatrex Morgue is a reflection of that. One might say, looking through the Aatrex Morgue discography, that it's very perverse, disgusting, and taboo-like in nature, which, really hard to disagree against those descriptions. However, what really makes it messed up to me is that all of the themes, all the music you're hearing is Marco basically expressing how much he just hates life itself, that he just wants to end his life and kill himself, practically. And you might think that's nothing new to hear, as there's so many black metal bands or DSBM bands that had the same exact themes, and yeah, you might find it overly edgy or it's just shock value, but what makes it so legit is that on May 6, 2007, Marco would end up taking his own life through hanging. And looking back at everything, it gives off a very morbid and ghostly vibe, knowing that this individual was basically, on the brink of wanting to end his life whenever he was recording any sort of music for Aatrex Morgue. Very similar to Aatrex Morgue is Genocide Organ, again another death industrial project. But whereas Aatrex Morgue has such a fascination, at least theme-wise, to do with self-loathing to this insane degree, Genocide Organ has a very misanthropic and hateful outlook on the world itself. One thing I've noticed whenever I look into anything that Genocide Organ does is they have such a fascination not only with just a very harsh and hateful outlook on the world, but it's mainly having to do with atrocities that mankind has done. But it's not the well-known atrocities that we would, tend to think of whenever we hear that word. It's all these forgotten and esoteric-like things that has happened in this world that's really fucked up, that they tend to just have a fascination with, or they just enthrall themselves in this very hateful attitude that honestly, the themes and sound and attitude that Genocide Organ has makes all of these extreme metal bands that tend to come off either hateful or barbaric seem like child's play. Musically, this album has all the characteristics that you would expect with death industrial. Obviously, it's very harsh, abrasive, and super dense with everything. That just feels like the weight of the world is on top of your head, crushing you down. And I feel like the reason why they make their music like this is to align itself with the themes of just how unapologetic and cruel mankind is with all the atrocities we've done. The music is meant to be like a representation of that. And man, let me tell you, to anyone who is willing to actually listen to a Genocide Organ album from beginning to end, it's going to be quite the endurance test, to say the least. But of course, what would a video about disturbing albums be without including Gnaw Their Tongue's All the Dread Magnificence of Perversity? And before I get into it, yes, I am working on an explaining video for Gnaw Their Tongues in the future, so don't even bother asking. But for those who know me, it's really not a surprise that I'm including this. But for those who don't know what Gnaw Their Tongues is, it's technically a one-man black metal project, yet with this album, I really don't know if you can even call it black metal anymore, as there's elements of, yes, black metal's in it, but you got industrial, dark ambient, noise, and a lot of different experimentation going on here that's really hard to distinguish what exactly Maurice was going for stylistically on this album, other than creating one of the most nightmarish, hellish, and most fucked up albums I've ever heard. Because this album goes for over an hour long, and it just feels like I'm trapped in somebody's torture chamber, as if this album was made for a snuff film, because everything has this dreadful sense of urgency with no sense of escape, no sense that it's going to give you any breath to recollect yourself. It's just always meant to smother you in a very perverse, disturbing, and morbid way, but it's very realistic also in nature. I think some of the audio samples that they use of individuals screaming out in pain, or a woman screaming how much she needs help and just gasping for air, showcases that the whole vibe of this album is to give you the audio sense of what a snuff film is, as I stated. And I don't know, with that description alone, how can I not find this disturbing? Then there's Black Mountain Transmitter, Black Goat of the Woods. That is a combination of drone, dark ambience, and synthesizers utilized that, yeah, it's very minimalistic in approach, but in terms of how the pacing and composition is on this album, it sounds otherworldly, and nothing about it is natural, which makes it really uneasy for me personally to listen to. That I remember I would always talk about this with friends and discuss it, that it's basically music showcasing what it would sound like if you were to talk to aliens, basically. And I guess because of this really unconventional and otherworldly sound that it gives off, it just makes me really paranoid how everything is when I listen to it. That I just wish I had eyes in the back of my head to just give me some sense of ease, because again, nothing's natural. If anything, this kind of feels like what it would be like if the Uncanny Valley had sound to it. Because I know that's always utilized in the sense of what we see, but if there were ever to be an album that gives me an Uncanny Valley sense in terms of the audio experience, this is it. Peter Sotos, Buyer's Market. Now, if you already know of this album, I really don't need to say anything for it to be included in this. But for those who don't know of it, how do I describe this? Well, Peter Sotos is one of the founding members for the group White House, and I know when it comes to power electronics, White House are a very influential figure in their respected field, yes, but Buyer's Market by Peter Sotos isn't technically music. It's just all audio samples that go for like roughly an hour long, like 61 minutes in length. And again, as I stated, all audio samples of children talking about a crime that was committed to them. And I'll just say this. I've always left links in the description to the music that I showcase, and this won't be one of them, because it's all up to you if you're willing to even hear a minute of this, because I remember out of curiosity I wanted to check it out, and I'll just leave it at around 2.5 minutes. I just gave up, because what you're going to hear is going to unsettle you. There's no way it can't, and I'm just going to leave it at that, and we're going to move on to the next album now. Second to last is going to be John Zorn's Kristallnacht. Now, I've always stated that John Zorn is a madman of a musician, how just frantic and chaotic and wild he creates jazz music, that it becomes so, I don't know, schizophrenic and just sporadic that I feel like it unintentionally becomes grindcore, although I know John Zorn has always been a fan of grindcore, hence why one of his bands that he was a part of, Painkiller, was actually signed to Earache for a few years. But with all of his personal projects where he hires his own like inner circle kind of like of musicians to do his like compositional work, Kristallnacht is much more sinister, and because of it, it's more realistic, and it all has to do with John Zorn exploring his Jewish heritage. And he decided to do that on Kristallnacht based off of the Night of Broken Glass that happened in Nazi-occupied Germany, I believe in November of 1938. And all had to do with ransackings and pogroms of Nazis attacking Jewish homes, hospitals, and synagogues that led to looting and homicide. It's a really disturbing and fucked up, again, topic to talk about in world history. And what makes the music side of it not really help out all that much in terms of making it less disturbing is that he'll have like these speeches go off that I'm presuming is all of sounds like German, so I'm assuming like German speeches during the time, that it almost drowns out all of the music that you're going to hear. And again, this is where it becomes more noise affiliated, and what the instrumentation sounds like, whether it be the flutes or the horns or the violins or all the other stringed instruments, it just becomes like now background noise that, if anything, the instruments sound like cries for help now, almost as if he's trying to have like this musical reflection of the Night of Broken Glass. And just in world history alone, it's disturbing and messed up that human beings did this. But to have a musical representation of it where it sounds similar in structure, it's really dark. That's all I can say. And this is easily the most disturbing material John Zorn has ever done with any of the projects he's been associated with. And the last album for this video that I find disturbing will be Scott Walker's 2006 full-length, The Drift. Now, I don't know much about this individual other than he has a very prolific music career, and during the 21st century he went through quite the transition on his musical approach. And when I was searching up disturbing albums a few years ago, I tend to find myself always being recommended this specific album. And letting curiosity get the better of me when I listened to it, it disturbed me, but not in the sense of like the context of the lyrical themes or what the album's about, but this is the only album that I've heard that just how everything is played out musically really ends up disturbing me. For one, how Scott Walker sings, it's just very off-putting and leaves me really uneasy. Because it sounds like every verse that he does, it sounds like as if he's taking his very last breath of his life. It doesn't sound natural at all. Then there's the instrumentation that I noticed a lot of people tend to compare it to the debut full-length album by Suicide, as it's really abstract sounding in nature. But while Suicide is weird and different with their approach, I guess it's a little bit easier to the ears for me personally, because there's a sense of like punk influence embedded in their approach, where Scott Walker has nothing to do with punk, and it just becomes all the more abstract and odd to my ears because nothing seems like it's being played correctly other than to just really haunt you. There's always like this sense of urgency, but it lingers on in the back. And when it comes through with the organs and synthesizers, it feels like hell itself is opening up its doors to you. It has like this ghostly type of aesthetic to it, but you can never really make out what exactly he's trying to portray with it, that it just leaves my mind racing to just make sense of everything. Overall, I just find this album really unique in approach. Again, it's the only thing I've ever heard that just musically overall leaves my skin crawling because of just how unnatural and off-putting it is. And I'd really like to know if there's anything else out there that, again, in the musical sense, is similar to this. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Like always, everything I talked about in this video will be linked in the description. And yeah, other than that, like always, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. And after everything I talked about in this video, try at the very best to have a nice day.